This feels nice. Come up to the fire, ladies.
I'm not cold.
Now, Mr. Hale, before we begin, why don't you explain to Mr. Henderson just what you saw when you came here yesterday morning?
By the way, has anything been moved? Are things just as you left them yesterday?
Well, it's just the same. When it dropped below zero last night, I thought I'd better send Frank out to make a fire for us. No use getting pneumonia with a big case on, but I told him not to touch anything except for the stove, and, well, you know Frank.
Somebody should have been left here yesterday.
Oh, yesterday. Well, when I had to send Frank out to the Moore Center for the man who went crazy, I want to let you know I had my hands full yesterday. I need to be back home by today, and as long as I checked over everything here myself.
Well, Mr. Hale, tell just what happened when you came here yesterday morning.
Well, Harry and I had started town with a load of potatoes. We were coming down the road from my place, and as I got here, I said, I'm going to see if I can make John Wright to join me on a party telephone. We spoke about it once before, but he put me off, saying, folks talk too much anyways. Well, I guess you know how much he talked himself, but I thought if I went to him before his wife, though, I said to Harry that I don't think is what his wife wanted made much difference to John.
Let's talk about that later, Mr. Hale. I do want to talk about it, but tell now just what happened when you got to the house.
Well, I didn't see or hear anything. I knocked on the door and it was still all quiet inside. Well, I knew they must be up. It was past 8 o'clock, so I knocked again. This time I thought I heard it come in. I wasn't sure. I'm not sure yet, but I opened the door, this door, and there, in that rocker, sat Mrs. Wright.
What was she doing?
She was rocking back and forth. She had her apron in her hands and was kind of pleading.
How did she look?
Well, she looked queer.
How do you mean queer?
Well, as if she didn't know what she was going to do next. Kind of done up. Well, I said, how do you do, Miss Wright? It's cold, isn't it? Is it? She said. Just kind of went on pleading at her apron. Well, I was surprised. She didn't ask me to come to the stove or to sit down, but just sat there, not even looking at me. I want to see John, I said. And then she laughed. I guess you would call it a laugh. Can I see John? No, she says. Well, ain't he home? Yes, she says. He's home. Then why can't I see him? Because he's dead, she says. Well, dead? I didn't know what to say. Well, why? Well, where is he? And then she just pointed upstairs. Like that. Well, then I said, well, why? Well, what did he die of? He died of a rope around his neck, she says. Well, I went out and got Harry. I thought I might need help. So we went upstairs, and there he was lying.
I think I'd rather you go into that upstairs, where you can point it all out. Just go on now with the rest of the story.
Well, he was here, and my first thought was to get that rope off. We looked, but Harry, he said, no, he's dead all right. We better not touch anything. So we went back downstairs, and there Mrs. Wright was sitting that same way. Has anyone been notified? I asked. No, she said. Well, Harry, he got straight to the point. Who did this, Miss Wright? And at that, she stopped. I don't know, she says. You don't know, Harry says. No, she says. Weren't you sleeping in the bed with him? He asks. Yes, but I was on the inside, she says. Somebody slipped a rope around his neck and strangled him, and you didn't notice. I didn't wake up, she says. We must have looked like we didn't know how that could be, for after a moment, she says, oh, I sleep sound. Well, Harry, he wanted to ask her more questions, but I thought we ought to take her story first to the sheriff or to the coroner. So Harry went as fast as he could to Randy's place where there's a telephone.
And what did Mrs. Wright do when she knew you had gone before?
Well, she moved from that chair to this one. She had her hands together and was looking down. Well, I had a feeling I ought to make some conversation, so I said I'd come in to see if John wanted to put in the telephone. And at that, she laughed, and then she looked at me. Scared. Well, I don't know. Maybe it wasn't scared. I wouldn't like to say it was. Well, soon Harry got back, and then Dr. Lloyd came, and you, Mr. Peters, and, well, I guess that's all I know that you guys don't.
Oh, I guess we'll start upstairs first, then go out to the barn and around there. You're convinced there was nothing important in here? Nothing that would point to any motive?
Nothing here but kitchen things.
Here's a nice mess.
Oh, her fruit. Did freeze. She worried about that when it turned so cold. That her drawers would break and her fruit would freeze.
Well, can you beat the woman? Held for murder and worried about her preserves?
I guess before we're through, she may have something more serious than preserves to worry about.
Well, women are used to worrying over trifles.
Yes, but for all their worries, what would we do without the ladies? Oh, God, dirty towels. She wasn't much of a housekeeper, was she, ladies?
There's a great deal of work to be done on a farm.
To be sure. Yet I know there are some Dixon County farmhouses that do not have such towels.
Towels get dirty awful quick. Men's hands aren't always clean as they might be.
Loyal to your sex, I see. But you two were neighbors. I suppose you were friends too?
I've not seen much of her of late years. I've not been here. It's more than a year.
Why was that? You didn't like her?
I liked her all well enough. Farmers' wives had their hands full, and then
Yes.
it wasn't a very cheerful place.
No, it's not cheerful. I shouldn't say she had the housemaking instinct.
Well, I don't know that John Wright had either.
You mean they didn't get along?
No, I don't mean anything. I just don't know if a place would be any more cheerful for John Wright being in it.
I think I'd rather talk about later. I want to go upstairs now and get the lay of things up there.
I suppose anything Mrs. Peters brings would be all right. She was supposed to take in some towels and clothes and other things. We left in such a hurry yesterday morning.
Yes, but I would like to see that you take Mrs. Peters and keep an eye out for anything that might be of use to us.
Yes, Mr. Henderson. I hate to have men coming around snooping in my kitchen and criticizing. Well, it's only their duty. Duty's all right. Seems awful mean to talk bad about her for not having things slipped up when she had to come away in such a hurry. It's a shame about her fruit. I wonder if it's all gone. Oh, I think there might be some that's all right, Mrs. Peters. Yes, it is. I believe it's cherries, too. I think that's the only one. She'll feel awful bad about all her hard work in the hot weather. I remember when I had to put up my cherries last summer.
Well, I ought to get those things from the front closet. You coming with me, Mrs. Hale? You could help me carry them. My, it's awful cold in there.
Wright was closed off. I think that's why she kept to herself so much. I mean, she didn't even belong to a ladies' aid. I suppose she felt she couldn't do her part. You know, you don't enjoy things when you feel shabby. She used to wear pretty clothes and be lively when she was Minnie Foster, one of the town girls singing in the choir. But that was 30 years ago. This you all was to take?
She said she wanted an apron. Funny thing to want, for there isn't much to get you dirty in jail. Goodness knows. I suppose to make her feel more natural, she said it would be in the top drawer of the cupboard. Oh, yes, here it is. And her shawl that always hung on the back of the rocker. There it is.
Mrs. Peters?
Yes, Mrs. Hale? Do you think I did it?
Do you think she did it?
I don't know.
Well, I don't. I mean, asking about her apron and her little shawl, worrying about her fruit.
Careful, Sheriff. Sorry about that.
Mr. Peters says it looks bad for her. Mr. Henderson is often sarcastic in speech and makes fun of her for not waking up.
Well, John Wright didn't wake when they were slipping the milk around his neck.
No, but it's strange. It must have been done awful crafty and still. You say it was such a funny way to kill a man, rigging it all up like that.
That's just what Mr. Hale said. There was a gun in the house. That's what he can't understand.
Mr. Henderson said coming in that what was missing for the case was a motive, something to show anger and sudden feeling.
Well, I don't see any signs of anger here. It's wiped here. Wonder how they're finding things upstairs? I hope she kept things a little more up there. You know, it seems kind of sneaking, locking her up and then coming here and trying to get her house to turn against her.
But Mrs. Hale, the law is the law.
I suppose it is. Better loosen up your things, Mrs. Peters.
She was piecing a quilt?
It's a log cabin pattern. Pretty, isn't it? I wonder if she was just going to quilt it or not it.
They wondered if she was gonna quote it or just nod it.
Well, Frank's fire didn't do much good up there, did it? Let's go out to the bar to get back here. Go to the nod.
I don't see as it's anything strange, us taking up our time with little things while they're up looking for evidence. And I don't see as it's anything to laugh about.
Well, they've got awful important things on their minds.
Mrs. Peters, look at this one. Here, this is the one she was working on. And look at all the rest of it. It's all nice and even. And then look at this. It looks like she doesn't even know what she was on about.
What are you doing?
I'm just pulling out a stitch or two. Bad sewing makes me fidgety.
I don't think we ought to touch things.
I'll just finish up this end. Mrs. Peters?
Yes, Mrs. Hale?
What do you suppose she was so nervous about?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know, as if she was nervous. I often sew awful queer when I'm just tired. Well, I better get things slicked up. The men might be done sooner than we think. I wonder where I can find a piece of paper or a string.
In that cupboard, maybe?
Why, here's a bird cage. Did she have a bird, Mrs. Hale?
Why, I don't know if she had a bird or not. I haven't been here in so long. There was a man about a year ago selling canaries real cheap. Maybe she bought one. I don't know if she did. She used to sing real pretty herself.
Funny to think of a bird here. But she must have had one. Why else have a cage?
I wonder what happened to it. I suppose maybe the cat got it?
No. She has that feeling some people have towards cats, being afraid of them. My cat got into her room once and she was real upset. She asked me to take it out.
My sister Betsy's like that. Queer, isn't it?
Why? Look at the door. It's broke. One hinge is pulled apart.
Why, it looks like somebody may have been rough with it.
Why, yes.
I wish if they were gonna find any evidence they'd be about it. I don't like this place.
But I'm awful glad you came with me, Mrs. Hale. It would be lonesome of me sitting here alone.
It would, wouldn't it? I tell you what I do wish, Mrs. Peters. I wish I'd come here sometimes. I wish I had.
But you're an awful busy woman, Mrs. Hale, with your children and your home.
I could have come. I stayed away because it wasn't a cheerful place, and that's why I ought to have come. I didn't like this place. Maybe because it's down in a hollow and you couldn't see the road. I don't know. It was a lonesome place and always was. I wish I'd come and see Minnie Foster sometimes. I can see now.
You mustn't reapproach yourself, Mrs. Hale. Sometimes we don't know how it is for other folks until something comes up.
Not having children makes less work, but it also makes an empty house, and with Wright out to work all day and no company when he did come in. Did you know John Wright, Mrs. Peters?
Not to know him. I've seen him in town. They say he was a good man.
Yes, good. He didn't drink, and he kept his word as well as most, I guess, but he was a hard man, Mrs. Peters, like a raw wind that gets to the bone. I should think she would have wanted a bird. But what do you suppose went with it?
I don't know. Unless it got sick and died.
Come to think of it, she was kind of like a bird, all sweet and timid, but kind of timid and fluttery. How she did change. I tell you what, Mrs. Peters, why don't you take in the quilt in with you and take it to her? It might help take up her mind.
Why, I think that's a real nice idea, Mrs. Hale, if there couldn't possibly be any objection to it. Now, I wonder if some of her pieces are in here, or her things.
Here's some red, and I suppose this has got some sewing things in it, and pretty box. Looks like something somebody might give to you. Maybe their scissors are in here. Or there's something wrapped up in this piece of silk.
Why? That isn't her scissors.
Oh, Miss Peters,
It's the bird.
but Miss Peters, look at its neck. It's all twisted. It's all other side too.
Somebody wrung its neck.
There's no tracks leading up to the house. Nothing come away from the barn.
Doesn't make sense.
Well, ladies, have you decided whether she was going to quilt it or not?
We think she was going to knot it.
That's interesting, I'm sure. Has the bird flown?
We think the cat got it.
Is there a cat?
Not anymore. They're superstitious, you know. They just leave.
No sign at all of anyone having come from the outside. Their own rope. Now let's go up and go over it piece by piece. It would have had to have been somebody who knew just the way to get into the house without alerting Mr. or Mrs. Wright.
She liked the bird. She was gonna bury it in that pretty box.
When I was a little girl, my kitten, there was a boy, and before my eyes, and before I could get to him, if they didn't hold him back, I would have killed him.
I wonder how it would have been to never have any children around. No, Wright wouldn't have liked the bird thing that sang. She used to sing, she's only a bird in gilded cage. He killed that too.
We don't know who killed the bird.
I knew John Wright.
It was an awful thing that was done in the house that night. Killing a man while he slept, slipping a note around his neck that choked the life out of him.
Isn't that choke the life out of him?
We don't know who killed him. We don't know!
If there had been nothing for years and years but a bird to sing to you, it would be awful. Still, after the bird was still,
I know what stillness is. After Dakota, my first baby died. After his second birthday, with me, and no other than,
how long do you suppose they'll be through looking for evidence?
I know what stillness is. But the law has got to punish the crime, Mrs. Hale.
I wish you'd seen Minnie Foster when she wore her white dress with blue ribbons and she stood up in the choir and sang, I wish I'd come and visit it sometimes. That was a crime! That was a crime! Who's gonna punish
You
that?
mustn't reapproach yourself.
I should have known. I tell you, it's queer, Mrs. Peters. We live close together and we live far apart. We all go through the same things, just different kinds of same things. Tell you what, Mrs. Peters. Don't tell her proof that went bad. Tell her it ain't. Take this in to prove it to her. She may never know if it's broke or not.
My, it's an awful good thing the men couldn't hear us. What if they just laugh, getting all stirred up over something like a dead canary, as if that has something to do with that. What if they just laugh?
Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't.
No, Peters, it's all perfectly clear except a reason for doing it. But you know juries when it comes to women. If there was some definite thing, something to show, something to make a story about, a thing to connect up with a strange way of doing it.
Well, I got the team outside. Pretty cold out.
I'm gonna stay here a while by myself. I want to go over everything again. You can send Frank out for me, can't
Yeah,
you?
but didn't you want to see who Mrs. Pierce is going to bring in?
I suppose they're not very dangerous things the ladies have picked up. No, Mrs. Peters doesn't need supervising. For that matter, a sheriff's wife is married to the law. Ever think of it that way, Mrs. Peters?
Not just like that.
Married to the law? I think we should check out these windows.
Oh, windows.
We'll be right back, Mr. A.
Well, Henry, at least we found out that she wasn't going to quilt it. She was going to, what do you call it, ladies?
We call it not it, Mr. Henderson.